Hello everyone, and welcome to the Unanswered Questions True Crime Podcast.
I have spent hours and hours investigating this.
He basically told her that people have been killed. Journalists, independent investigators, people like that disappeared. It frightened her to the bone.
There's more to the story than meets the eye.
There were rumors of torture and homicide and sexual abuse, all sorts of egregious, horrendous crimes.
He was polygraphed 3 times. Each of those 3 showed evasions.
His resumes were a skeleton of truth.
He was mad at the world, and particularly mad at the government.
The study that he commissioned described a fictional terrorist attack.
If people have died over this, it means you're getting close to the truth.
You don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to say, what the fuck?
Welcome to Charles Allen Lechmere. So, Charles Allen Lechmere, born the 5th of October 1849 and died on the 23rd of December 1920, also known as Charles Cross, was a meat cart driver for the Pickfords Company and is conventionally regarded as an innocent witness who discovered the body of the first canonical Ripper victim, Mary Ann Nichols. In a documentary titled Jack the Ripper, The New Evidence, Swedish journalist Christopher Holmgren and criminologist Gareth Norris of Aberystwyth University, with assistance from former detective Andy Griffiths, proposed that Lechmere was the Ripper. Now, according to Holmgren, Lechmere lied to police, claiming that he'd been with Nichols' body for a few minutes, whereas research on his route to work from his home demonstrated that he must have been with her for about 9 minutes. When Lechmere called over Robert Paul to look at her, no blood was visible, but by the time a constable found her body shortly afterwards, a pool had formed around her neck, suggesting the cut to her throat was extremely fresh when Lechmere and Paul were present. He also refused Paul's suggestion to prop her up, which would have instantly made it clear that her throat had been cut. In addition, neither man reported seeing or hearing anyone else in Bucks Row, which had no side exits. Her injuries were also hidden under her clothing, whereas the Ripper typically left the wounds displayed. It was theorized that Lechmere had killed Nichols and begun the process of mutilating her body when he heard Paul's footsteps and then rushed to portray himself as the discoverer of her body. Now, Lechmere did not come forward until Paul mentioned him to the press, and he gave evidence under the name Charles Cross at the inquest. Cross was the surname of his stepfather. Now, Lechmere's home address, visits to family, and route to work link him to the times and places of murders. He passed 3 streets where Martha Tabram, Polly Nichols, and Annie Chapman were murdered roughly at the same time. The murders were estimated to have occurred. The double event murders of Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes occurred on a Saturday, this his only night off from work. Stride was killed near Lechmere's mother's house in an area he grew up in, and the direct route from Stride's murder scene to the location of Eddowes' murder followed a path to Lechmere's route to work that he'd used for 20 years. Murray Kelly was also murdered on his route to work at the time frame in which she is estimated to have been killed matches his route, although the day she was killed was a holiday and he may have had the day off. Now, Lechmere's family background is also similar to that of many serial killers. He grew up in a broken home, having never known his biological father. He had 2 stepfathers, and his childhood was characterized by an instability of residence, growing up in a series of different homes. In addition, his occupation as a meat cart driver would have allowed his blood-spattered appearance to escape suspicion. Holmgren believes that Lechmere may have been responsible for several other murders in addition to those of the canonical 5 victims and Martha Tabram. Then we come to Jacob Levy. So Jacob Levy, born 1856 and died on the 29th of July 1891, was born in Eldgade in 1856. He followed in his father's trade as a butcher, and by 1888 he was living in Middlesex Street with his wife and children, which was right in the heart of Ripper territory and close to where Catherine Eddowes was murdered. Levy was a butcher with the necessary skills to remove certain organs from the victims and was recorded as suffering from general paralysis of the insane, which I've never actually heard of. His 1890 asylum records report that he feels that if he is not restrained, he will do some violence to someone, end quote. The 2009 video game Sherlock Holmes vs. Jack the Ripper uses a combination of historically attested and embellished evidence to propose his candidacy. Jacob Levy's life is featured on an episode of the podcast Bad Woman, The Ripper Retold, where Jennifer Wallace, a historian of medicine and psychiatry, comments that it is unlikely a person in Levy's condition would have been able to carry out serial murders and persistently concealed having done so. Then we come to James Maybrick. So James Maybrick, born on the 24th of October 1838 and died the 11th of May 1889, was a Liverpool cotton merchant. His wife Florence was convicted of poisoning him with arsenic in a sensational and possibly unjust trial presided over by Sir James Fitzjames Stephen, the father of another modern suspect, James Kenneth Stephen. In her book Jack the Ripper, The American Connection, author Shirley Harrison asserted James Maybrick was both Jack the Ripper and the servant girl annihilator of Austin, Texas. The servant girl annihilator case is another case I will go into in another episode of my podcast, hopefully either later this season or later on in my podcast. A diary purportedly by Maybrick, published in the 1990s by Michael Barrett, contains a confession to the Ripper murders. In 1995, Barrett confessed to writing the diary himself and described the process of counterfeiting the diary in detail. He swore under oath that he and his wife Anne had forged it, and Barrett, after their divorce, later denied forgery, and their story changed several times over the years. The diary was discredited by historians who pointed to factual errors in relation to some of the crimes, and document experts pronounced the diary a fake. The handwriting does not match that of Mary Brick's will, and the ink contains a preservative not marketed until 1974. Then we come to Michael Maybrick. So Michael Maybrick, alias Stephen Adams, born the 31st of January 1841 and died the 26th of August 1913, was an English composer and singer best known under his pseudonym Stephen Adams as the composer of The Holy City. In his book from 2015, They All Love Jack, Busting the Ripper, Bruce Robinson documents how his suspect frequented the Whitechapel area where the murders took place and investigates a description of a man seen by Matthew Packer on the night of the murder of Elizabeth Stride, who resembled Michael Maybrick. The suspect's profession meant he frequently travelled around the UK, and the dates and locations of his performances coincide with when and where the letters to the police were sent from. The suspect's presence in Bradford around Christmas of 1888 also coincides with the murder of a 7-year-old boy, Johnny Gill, a murder which the Ripper had foretold to police in a letter. Then we come to Alexander Petachenko. So Alexander Petachenko, alleged dates of birth was 1857 to 1908, so he was born 1857 and died in 1908, was named in the 1923 memoirs of William Lequeix, I think that's how you pronounce that, I do apologise if I'm wrong, Things I Know About Kings, Celebrities and Crooks. Lequeix claimed to have seen a manuscript in French written by Rasputin stating that Jack the Ripper was an insane Russian doctor named Alexander Petachenko, an agent of the Orkhana, the secret police of Imperial Russia, whose aim in committing the murders was to discredit Scotland Yard. He was supposedly assisted by two accomplices, Levitsky and a tailorist named Winberg. However, there is no hard evidence that Petachenko ever existed, and many parts of the story, as recounted by Lequeix, fall apart when examined closely. For example, one of the sources named in the manuscript was a London-based Russian journalist called Niderist, who was known for inventing sensational stories. Reviewers of Lequeix's book were aware of Niderist's background and unabashedly referred to him as an unscrupulous liar. Petachenko was promoted as a suspect by Donald McCormick, who may have developed the story by adding his own inventions. Then we come to Walter Sickert. So Walter Richard Sickert, born the 31st of May 1860 and died on the 22nd of January 1942, was a German-born artist of British and Danish ancestry who was first mentioned as a possible Ripper suspect in Donald McCormick's book, The Identity of Jack the Ripper, published in 1959. He had a fascination with the Ripper murders, going as far as to stay in a room that was rumoured to have once had Jack the Ripper himself as a lodger and depicted similar scenes in many of his paintings. Sickert subsequently appeared as a character in the Royal Mosaic conspiracy theory concocted by Joseph Gorman, who claimed to be Sickert's illegitimate son. The theory was later developed by author Jean Overton Fuller and by crime novelist Patricia Cornwell in her books Portrait of a Killer, published in 2002, and Ripper, The Secret Life of Walter Sickert, 2017. However, Sickert is not considered a serious suspect by most who study the case, and strong evidence shows he was in France at the time of most of the Ripper murders. Cornwell's allegation that Sickert was the Ripper was based on a DNA analysis of letters that have been sent to Scotland Yard, but experts believe that those letters to be fake, and another genetic analysis of the letters claimed the murderer could have been a woman. Then we come to Joseph Silver. So South African historian Charles van Onselen claimed in the book The Fox and the Flies, The World of Joseph Silver, Racketeer and Psychopath, published in 2007, that Joseph Silver, who was born in 1868 and died in 1918, also known as Joseph Liz, a Polish Jew, was Jack the Ripper. Now, critics note, among other things, that Van Onselen provides no evidence that Silver was ever in London during the time of the murders, and that the accusation is based entirely upon speculation. Van Onselen has responded by saying that the number of circumstances involved should make Silver a suspect. I don't quite know about that. I mean, you can't just say that somebody is somebody based on speculation. I mean, that's a little bit stretching the mark, I think, because it's like, if that was the case, there would be everybody locked up in jail and there would be nobody free because we'd all be in jail because somebody speculates that we did something. Honestly, if you're going to accuse somebody, at least have some type of evidence that isn't based purely on speculation. I mean, look, you can speculate, but if you want to take it further than that and you actually want to accuse somebody of doing something, have something to back it up with. Because the problem I find is that when people accuse somebody of doing something, they don't realise that when you accuse somebody, even if they're proven to be found not guilty, that accusation is still going to stick. If you call somebody a serial killer and they don't turn out to be a serial killer, and it becomes a big nationwide case and it's really well publicised and everyone knows about this guy, unless there's name suppression ordered by the judge, in most cases there are, but not always, then that person's now going to be tarnished with being known as a serial killer. Then when he's found not guilty, everyone's still going to go, well, you know, he got off, but he was named as a serial killer. They must have suspected him for some reason. And people are going to rumour monger and they're going to be lots of gossiping going on about that person. So when you accuse somebody of doing something, at least make sure that there's some evidence. Whether it be a sketchy past, whether it be evidence of them being involved in something, at least be able to back up what you're saying. The fact that there's nothing to suggest Joseph Silver was Jack the Ripper, and there's only accusation is based entirely upon, and the accusation is based entirely upon speculation, I find it hard to even consider him a suspect. And the fact that Onselen said that the circumstances involved should make Silver a suspect. Well, look, just because there's a number of circumstances and it's speculation, you've got to have something to back it up with. Because if you haven't got anything to back it up with, it's just that, a rumour, it's speculation. You've got to have something to back it up with. Then we come to James Kenneth Stephen. So James Kenneth Stephen, born on the 25th of February 1859 and died on the 30th of February 1892, was first suggested as a suspect in a biography of another Ripper suspect, Prince Albert Victor, Duke of Clarence and Avondale, by Michael Harrison, published in 1972. Harrison dismissed the idea that Albert Victor was the Ripper, but instead suggested that Stephen, a poet and one of Albert Victor's tutors from Trinity College, Cambridge, was a more likely suspect. Harrison's suggestion was based on Stephen's misogynistic writings and on similarities between his handwriting and that of the From Hell letter, supposedly written by the Ripper. Now, Harrison supposed that Stephen may have had sexual feelings for Albert Victor and that Stephen's hatred of women arose from jealousy because Albert Victor preferred female company and did not reciprocate Stephen's feelings. However, Harrison's analysis was rebutted by professional document examiners. There's no proof that Stephen was ever in love with Albert Victor, although he did commit suicide by starvation shortly after hearing of Albert's death. Frank Spiring further developed the theory in his book Prince Jack, published in 1978, which depicted Albert Victor as the murderer and Stephen as his lover. The book is widely dismissed as sensational fiction based on previous theories rather than genuine historical research. Spiering claimed to have discovered a copy of some private notes written by another suspect, Sir William Gull, in the library of the New York Academy of Medicine, and that the notes included a confession by Albert Victor under a state of hypnosis. Spiring further suggested that Albert Victor died due to an overdose of morphine administered to him on the order of Prime Minister Lord Salisbury, and possibly Albert Victor's own father, Edward VII of the United Kingdom. The New York Academy of Medicine denies possessing the record Spiring mentioned, and when Spiring was offered access to the Royal Archives, he retorted, and I quote, "I don't want to see any files." Well, I mean, that should say it all. I mean, if somebody goes out of their way to make a statement like that, and then they're given access to something, it's kind of like, well, now you've just called their bluff. Who's going to turn down an offer to access the Royal Archives to prove their point? I mean, look, if this was legitimate, then he would have gone into the Royal Archives and he would have said, oh, that's awesome. You know, it's like being given access to Fort Knox to prove your conspiracy theory is correct. And then you turn around and you say no. So you're going to tell me that you've got a conspiracy theory, you're then given an unprecedented access to something to prove your conspiracy theory, and then you say no, I'm not going to do it. Well, that kind of proves the point that it wasn't true. Because then he retorts, I don't want to see any files. Well, you've kind of created this story, and now you're turning around and you're saying, oh, well, I don't want anything to do with this, I'm not going to check any files. Well, obviously you're a liar then, obviously, because if you're going to turn down an opportunity to go into the Royal Archives, and I don't know how easy or hard it is to get access to the Royal Archives, but if you're given a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to prove your point and you turn it down, I kind of start wondering exactly if you're telling the truth or not. Then we come to Francis Thompson. So Francis Thompson, born on the 18th of December 1859 and died on the 13th of November 1907, was an esoteric poet and opium addict with some medical training between 1885 and 1888. He spent some time homeless in the docks area south of Whitechapel. He was proposed as a suspect in the self-published 2016 book Francis Thompson, A Ripper Suspect by Australian teacher Richard Patterson, who cites interpretations of his poetry. Then we have Willie Clarkson. So William Berry Willie Clarkson, born in 1861 and died on the 12th of October 1934, was the royal wig maker and costume maker to Queen Victoria and lived approximately 2 miles from each of the canonical 5 crime scenes. He was first named as a suspect in 2019, with many of the assertions based on Clarkson's 1937 biography written by Harry J. Greenwald. Clarkson is known to have stalked his ex-fiancée and was reputedly a blackmailer and arsonist. He is suspected of committing the murders to cover up his blackmail schemes. Evidence presented to support the theory of Clarkson as a suspect included the revelation that he admitted one of his custom-made wigs was found near the scene of one of the Ripper killings, a fact not previously widely known in the Ripperology community. Additionally, Clarkson's biography quotes him as stating that the police obtained disguises from him for their search for the Ripper, and as such he would have been aware of the trails they followed, allowing him to elude capture. Hair-cutting shears and barber surgeon tools, his father or grandfather allegedly being a barber surgeon of the kind used by a wig maker at the time, closely matched the shape and style of the weapons suspected to have been used in the murders. Then we come to Sir John Williams. So Sir John Williams, born on the 6th of November 1840 and died on the 24th of May 1926, was an obstetrician to Queen Victoria's daughter Princess Beatrice and was accused of the Ripper crimes in the book Uncle Jack, published in 2005, written by one of the surgeon's descendants, Tony Williams and Humphrey Price. The authors claim that the victim knew the doctor personally, that they were killed and mutilated in an attempt to research the cause of infertility, and that a badly blunted surgical knife, which belonged to Williams, was the murder weapon. Jennifer Pegg demonstrated in 2 articles that much of the research in the book was flawed. For example, the version of the notebook entry used to argue that Williams had met Ripper victim Mary Ann Nichols had been altered for print and did not match the original document, and the line as found in the original document was in handwriting that did not match the rest of the notebook. Williams' wife Lizzie was named as a possible suspect by author John Morris, who claims that she was unable to have children and, in an unhinged state, took revenge on those who could by killing them. Now we come to further theories and other suspects in the case. So others named in the case as suspects include Swiss butcher Jacob Isenschmid, German hairdresser Charles Ludwig, apothecary and mental patient Oswald Puckeridge, born in 1838 and died in 1900, insane medical student John Sanders, born in 1862 and died in 1901, Swedish tramp Nicanor Benelux, and even social reformer Thomas Bernardo, who claimed he had met one of the victims, Elizabeth Stride, shortly before her murder. Isenschmid and Ludwig were exonerated after another murder was committed while they were in custody. There was no evidence against Bernardo, Benelius, Puckeridge or Sanders. According to Donald McCormick, other suspects include Mountainbeck L. Forbes Winslow, whose own suspect in the case was a religious maniac G. Wentworth Bell Smith. The theories continue, such as the 2009 addition of morgue assistant Robert Mann to the long list of suspects. Now, I've always said about this case is that there are so many suspects and so many books that keep coming out about Jack the Ripper. I mean, it is the most well-known, unsolved murder mystery in the history of true crime. There's even the term Ripperologist for people that have studied this. I mean, people have written big, huge, thesaurus-type books on the subject and written about everybody from the Queen's own royal family members to local doctors down the street. I mean, there are so many suspects. It's crazy. You could throw all their names into a hat, pick one out, and people will say that's Jack the Ripper. Because everyone has their own interpretation on who it is. They've got their own evidence on who it is. Personally, I don't think we'll ever know who Jack the Ripper really was. I just don't, because, I mean, this is in the late 1800s, 1888. There was no real forensic evidence. There was no such thing as DNA. There was probably, maybe, I'd like to say fingerprints, but then again, what fingerprints to match against what and where and on what? There's no evidence. I mean, look, if this happened today, Jack the Ripper would be caught like that. But back then, I mean, he didn't get caught because obviously he was very quick and methodical at what he did. And obviously policing back in those days is a lot different to what it is today. I mean, to get away with what he did today would be absolutely hard as hell to do. I mean, look, you could probably get away with it for a couple of years, but like other rippers, like the Yorkshire Ripper Peter Slackcliffe, you know, he got caught. So I have no doubt that one day we possibly might know who it is, but just like the Zodiac Killer and just like Mr. Cruel, I don't think we'll ever know who Jack the Ripper is. I just don't see it. I mean, look, there is, as I said, I've listed over probably a dozen or more people. There are so many people. Like, I have not come across a case where there have been more suspects in a case that all are somehow linked or connected to Jack the Ripper. Honestly, without evidence to point to someone, we'll never know who Jack the Ripper really was. I doubt that we'll ever know. And I don't want to sound like a pessimist and say, well, never's a strong word to use in true crime, because, I mean, there are cases that are 33 years old, 50 years old, 60 years old. Hell, I've even heard of a case that was 100 years old that was solved through forensic science, which is evolving every day. So I'm not going to be one of those people that's going to put the water and put the kibosh on it and say we'll probably never know who it was. But I just don't think that we'll ever really find out. There's too muddy. I mean, because as we've read through all these suspects, someone will name a suspect, write a book based on that suspect, trying to link them to the murders and say that they're Jack the Ripper, and then 2 or 3 others will come along and count them out. I mean, even the evidence doesn't match up, really, because then people go, oh, well, he wrote the From Hell letter. Oh, well, the handwriting doesn't match, and it doesn't match this person, doesn't match that person. I mean, put it this way, it could be somebody who's never even been mentioned as a suspect, which is why the handwriting will never match. So, it's just crazy. I mean, you know, people will write and say this person did it, and then two or three other people will come along and count that person out for various other reasons and say, well, the research is flawed, this person couldn't have done it for that reason. We'll never know, because nobody's ever going to agree on one particular suspect, because everyone has their own idea on who it is. It's been so muddied and so tarnished that I just don't ever think that we'll ever colloquially agree on a single suspect. I just don't see it, unfortunately. And that's not to say that we may find out one day who it is and everyone agrees, but at this point, I just, you know, people are going to keep coming up with names and just come up with anybody. You know, it's crazy how they just go from like, oh, this person did it, oh, this person did it, oh, that person did it. And I mean, some of them are so flimsy. I mean, you've got ones where there's only basic speculation and there's circumstantial evidence. This person lived where the murders happened. They were, you know, and there's all these other reasons, you know, they had mental health issues, or they were a butcher, or they had syphilis, or, you know, I could write a whole list of all the multitude of different reasons that someone became Jack the Ripper, okay? From being a mental patient all the way up to having syphilis and going mad. So, honestly, will we ever find out? Most probably not. But I'm open to the theory that we might, but I doubt it. Named suspects who may be entirely fictional include Dr. Stanley, cult leader Nikolai Vasiliev, Norwegian sailor Fogelma, and Russian needlewoman Olga Tereshkov, as well as the aforementioned Alexander Petachenko. Now, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle advanced theories involving a female murderer dubbed Jill the Ripper. Supporters of this theory believe that the murderer worked, or at least posed, as a midwife who could be seen with bloody clothes without attracting suspicion and would be more easily trusted by the victims than a man. Women proposed as a Ripper include the convicted murderers Marcy Percy and Constance Kent, and even theosophist Helena Blavatsky. The 19th of December 1893 edition of the Ohio Marion Daily Star reported that Lizzie Hilliday, a mentally ill Irish immigrant suspected of leaving a string of dead husbands in her wake before being arrested in upper New York State for the murder of 2 women and her late husband, was likewise accused of the Whitechapel murders, of which she spoke constantly about them. She denied any relation to them, however, and there was no evidence to contradict her claim. Some Ripper authors, such as Patricia Cornwell, believe the killer sent letters to the police and press. DNA analysis of the gum used on a postage stamp of one of the letters was inconclusive and not forensically reliable. The available material has been handled many times and is therefore far too contaminated to provide any meaningful results, as I said before. Moreover, most authorities consider the letter hoaxes. Nevertheless, Jeff Mudgett, himself a descendant of notorious American serial killer H.H. Holmes, used these handwriting samples in an attempt to link Holmes to the Ripper case. The H.H. Holmes theory is the basis for an 8-part cable TV series entitled American Ripper, which premiered on the History Channel on the 11th of July 2017. Author Frank Pierce, who purports to have access to a written confession, argues that the murders were performed by a man named John Pavitt, Sayer, who held multiple similarities such as residence and profession to alternate suspect George Chapman as part of an occult Freemason initiation. Several theorists suggest that Jack the Ripper was actually more than one killer. Stephen Knight argued that the murders were a conspiracy involving multiple miscreants, whereas others have proposed that each murder was committed by unconnected individuals acting independently of each other, which, if true, would mean there never was actually a single Ripper at all. The police of the time believed the Ripper was a local Whitechapel resident. His apparent ability to disappear immediately after the killing suggests an intimate knowledge of the Whitechapel neighbourhood, including its back alleys and hiding places. However, the population of Whitechapel was largely transient, impoverished, and often used aliases. The lives of many of its residents were little recorded. Now we get to the media side of things. So, the Ripper murders mark an important watershed in the treatment of crime by journalists. Jack the Ripper was not the first serial killer, but his case was the first to create a worldwide media frenzy. The Elementary Education Act of 1880, which had extended upon a previous act, made school attendance compulsory regardless of class. As such, by 1888, more working class people in England and Wales were literate. Tax reforms in the 1850s had enabled the publication of inexpensive newspapers with a wider circulation. These mushroomed in the later Victorian era to include mass circulation newspapers costing as little as a halfpenny. Along with popular magazines such as the Illustrated Police News, which made the Ripper the beneficiary of previously unparalleled publicity, consequently, at the height of the investigation, over 1 million copies of newspapers with extensive coverage devoted to the Whitechapel murders were sold each day. However, many of the articles were sensationalistic and speculative, and false information was regularly printed as fact. In addition, several articles speculating as to the identity of the Ripper alluded to local xenophobic rumours that the perpetrator was either Jewish or foreign. In early September, 6 days after the murder of Mary Ann Nichols, the Manchester Guardian reported, and I quote, "Whatever information may be in the possession of the police, they deem it necessary to keep secret. It is believed their attention is particularly directed to a notorious character known as Leather Apron." End quote. Journalists were frustrated by the unwillingness of the CID to reveal details of their investigation to the public, and so resorted to writing reports of questionable veracity. Imaginative descriptions of Leather Apron appeared in the press, but rival journalists dismissed these as a mythical outgrowth of the reporter fancy. John Pfizer, a local Jew who made footwear from leather, was known by the name Leather Apron and was arrested, even though the investigating inspector reported that, and I quote, "At present there is no evidence whatsoever against him." End quote. He was soon released after the confirmation of his alibis. After the publication of the Dear Boss letter, Jack the Ripper supplanted Leather Apron as the name adopted by the press and public to describe the killer. The name Jack was already used to describe another fabled London attacker, Spring-Heeled Jack, which is a case that I'll cover in a later podcast episode, who supposedly leapt over walls to strike at his victims and escape as quickly as he came. The invention and adoption of a nickname for a particular killer became standard media practice, with examples such as the Axeman of New Orleans, which is another case I'll cover in another podcast, the Boston Strangler, and the Beltway Sniper. Examples derived from Jack the Ripper include the French Ripper, the Dusseldorf Ripper, the Camden Ripper, the Blackout Ripper, Jack the Stripper, the Yorkshire Ripper, and the Rostov Ripper. Some of those cases I'll actually cover in later podcast episodes. Sensational press reports, combined with the fact that no one was ever convicted of the murders, have confused scholarly analysis and created a legend that casts a shadow over later serial killers. Despite continued interest in the case and ongoing investigation by both professional and amateur researchers, the Ripper's true identity will almost certainly never be known. With that, this case remains open, but with many unanswered questions that still remain unanswered. Please rate the show and let me know what you guys think about this and the many other cases I've covered. You can follow me on all major social media platforms, YouTube, BitChute, Dailymotion. I'm also on Twitter and Instagram. Links are all down below in the description. If you have a case you'd like me to look at or cover, don't hesitate to send me a message. I'm your host, and this has been the Unanswered Questions podcast. Until next time. Next on Unanswered Questions. The Bank of Credit and Commerce International, BCCI, was an international bank founded in 1972 by Aga Hassan Abidi, a Pakistani financier. The bank was registered in Luxembourg with head offices in Karachi and London. A decade after opening, BCCI had over 400 branches in 78 countries and assets in excess of US $20 billion, making it the 7th largest private bank in the world.